Welcome back. I've been waiting and willing to try this camera for quite a while, actually since the moment it got out, because I always thought the XS10 was a great camera, a great idea from Fuji, but I needed to try it for myself before jumping to conclusions. And finally, thanks to RCE Foto, the biggest used market in Italy, but also expanding in Europe, links in the description below, I could finally try this camera thanks to them again, and I could finally come up with my review of this little jewel from Fujifilm. Now, when it comes to the build quality, this camera is built, when it comes to material and the way it is built, it is very similar to the X-T30, which is its closest comparison in the Fujifilm lineup. So don't expect the X-T4. But in addition to the X-T30, it has a few features that makes it worth a lot more than the difference in price between this and the X-T30, because the camera has, as you probably already know, a more protruding grip, which makes it easier to hold, with a caveat which we're going to see in a moment. It's got the in-body image stabilization, and it's got the flippy screen, which is really important when it comes to vlogging. And even better than the X-T4 in this case, the microphone jack, which is finally a 3.5 millimeter jack, is located in a way that it doesn't get in the way of the selfie screen when you use it. Something that Fuji failed to do with the X-T4, which is, I don't know, it blows my mind. That is your flagship camera. You cannot screw that up. But it is what it is. But the X-S10 is very, very well designed. Now, in addition to all of that, it also has the pop-up flash, which I personally don't use, but it may come in handy at times, and shares the same batteries like the old battery, the NPW126S, I guess that's the full name. If not, I'll correct it. And this is kind of one of the flaws of this camera, but we're going to get to it in a bit. And also has a completely different button layout compared to the other Fuji cameras, because you don't have the shutter speed and the ISO dials like you do in the X-T4, but you have the more DSLR like PSAM dial with other front and back dials that you use to dial in your shutter speed and your aperture or ISO, depending on what you set them to. And also you have a third dial on the left, which is usually assigned to the Fujifilm film simulation, which is important for cameras such as this, because those are enthusiasts. These are enthusiast oriented cameras, so JPEG may become really, really important. The viewfinder and the back LCD screen are comparable to those of the X-T30 or X-E4, but the viewfinder is easier to use, the electronic viewfinder is easier to use than that of the X-E4. I don't know, maybe it's the way it's designed, the way it is positioned in the camera, I don't know, it feels a little bit better. While the X-T4 has that incredibly good switch that goes from stills to video, which completely changes the way your camera is set, the X-S10 doesn't have a specific switch. You have to turn the mode dial to get to the video function, even though you have a record button that is going to start recording with your last setting. So it's not that bad. And it also differentiates the menu similar to that of the X-T4. It's not the same, but it's really very, very similar. So the lack of that switch is not a big deal. While the lack of another switch is a huge deal to me, because I haven't been able to adapt to the lack of the autofocus settings button on the X-E4, and I didn't get used to it on the X-S10 either. I still think that a camera like that has to have an external dial or button or switch, call it whatever you want, that has to be dedicated to the focus mode. To me, it's really important, especially if you're taking picture. You may switch pretty frequently from one mode to the other. Having a tactile way of doing it is way better than assigning one of the function button, which there's many in this camera, don't get me wrong, but I love to have a physical switch for what concerns the focus mode. The shutter sound is not as quiet as the X-T4, which is super silent. That is incredible, but it's not loud at all. And the camera shoots 8 frames per second in mechanical shutter and 30 frames per second in electronic shutter. Even though what is limiting your performance in this is the buffer. It's not as fast as that of the X-T4, so you're gonna feel the buffer earlier than the X-T4 does. Let's just focus a little bit on the protruding grip, which is one of the highlights of this camera, but in a specific case may become a flaw of the camera. Because look at this. This is the camera with the 70-300, not a huge lens by any means. Just think about how bigger it is, the 100-400, for example. Now, with this, I barely have room for my fingers to grip the camera. This means that with bigger lenses, you won't be able to grip the camera easily. Or in some cases, let's just say you want to shoot with a 200 millimeters f2. I don't think so, but if you want to, it's gonna be complicated to work with it. So it's a good thing that they came up with the more protruding grip, but this comes at the price, and the price is the handling with bigger lenses. The autofocus of this camera is very fast and accurate, and it's basically the same as the X-T4 and all the other cameras. They came in the same generation, and especially for stills, there's not much to complain about. Even the face tracking, the eye tracking works pretty well. And again, I can completely trust the autofocusing of this camera. The joystick that you have is really easy to use to set the focusing area, even though I would have preferred to have it a little bit bigger, but that's like minor complaints. And manual focusing is easy, even though the electronic viewfinder is a little bit on the small side for that. When it comes to image quality, there's not much to say about it. The sensor is well known since the X-T3 launch. The sensor has been the same in all the Fuji cameras, and the sensor, in my opinion, is the best APS-C sensor around because it performs pretty good everywhere you use it. Minimal rolling shutter when you're either shooting with the electronic viewfinder, electronic shutter, or videos, and it works really well even at high ISO. I can use 6400 ISO without problems. Of course, you need to make sure that you don't underexpose, because then recovering the shadows from an underexposed shot like 6400 ISO, it's not pleasant. I can also use it at 12,800 ISO. Of course, that's for emergency. It's not like your normal shooting condition, but if you need to use it, you can use it. Of course, you accept the risk of adding noise, but the noise that comes out of this sensor is not that bad. I actually like when it's noisy. It's enjoyable. I don't know how to say that. I was also surprised when I realized how easy it is to recover 2 stops of highlights in an overexposed shot. You're seeing an example right now. So the sensor itself is very, very good, and the image quality coming out of it is incredibly good. On top of that, you have the film simulation from Fuji, so even the JPEGs come out really, really, really good. And also the sensor is good for video, but we're going to talk about video in a bit. The in-body stabilization, or IBIS, is one of the most important selling point of this camera, because Fuji was able to squeeze the image stabilization into a really small body, and in shrinking it down, you only lose a half stop of image stabilization. That's what the camera that's what Fujifilm says. Compared to the X-T4, you go from 6.5 stops to 6 stops with specific lenses. So, in a practical way, the effectiveness of the stabilization is pretty good. Now, I can tell you that the stabilization, especially for pictures, for stills, is incredibly good. Now, you're seeing right now a shot, two shots actually. The one is a 1/4 of a second, and the other one is at 1/2.5 seconds with the 33 millimeters handheld, relying only on the X-S10 image stabilizer. And the shots are incredibly clean and sharp. I did not expect it to be so effective, and I was really pleased. And with the wider lenses, you can easily shoot 1 second handheld without any problem. So, great job from Fujifilm there, especially considering that the camera is a lot smaller than the X-T4. Now, when it comes to video, the image quality, again, is comparable to that of the X-T4, and since the X-T4 is highly praised everywhere for its image quality, that's already an incredibly good starting point. Even though the two cameras don't share the same specs, and we're gonna get to it in a second. The stabilization in video works really well, and the half stop that you lose doesn't really show. Actually, but that's just my impression. Take it with a grain of salt, it's an impression. It seemed to me that the stabilization in the X-S10 is a little bit smoother than that of the X-T4 when it comes to video. Whether that's true or not, I have no measurable ways of telling you. So again, my impression, it's worth almost nothing, I have to admit. When it comes to the autofocus, it shares the same good and bad things about the X-T4. It is good for video, but sometimes, especially in tracking mode, it goes all over the place. I don't know why, even though it seemed to me that this is a little bit stickier. But again, that may be a little bit of a difference in settings that may change the way it works. The autofocus module is the same, and the performance is pretty much the same. I mentioned before that the X-T4 and the X-S10, despite sharing the same sensor, don't have the same specs when it comes to video. And let's dive into it. Now, the X-T4 has the capability of shooting 4K 60 frames per second, while the X-S10 is only limited to a 30 frame per second. Also, the X-T4 can shoot 10-bit H.265 videos 420 internally, while the X-S10 is limited internally to 8-bit H.264 420 video. While they both share the possibility of outputting from the HDMI 422 10-bit videos. Again, the X-T4 can shoot H.265 and H.264, while the X-S10 is limited only to H.264, which is a less efficient video, but it's less heavy on your PC. So, I mean, good and bad. One last thing, while the X-T4 has an all-intra option that allows you to shoot at a whopping 400 megabit per second image quality, which is crazy good, the X-S10 is limited to long group of pictures at 200 megabit per second, which is still really high bandwidth. So don't just dismiss the X-S10 because it doesn't get to 400. 400 means a lot of data, and then you have to handle it, store it, and all of that. So, but these differences are there, and they're worth being mentioned. And in my conclusions, I'm going to tell you what I think about this difference. But as a video camera, the X-S10 performs really, really well. The control and dials are designed to be really useful in that condition, and the handling with normal sized lenses is incredibly good. And compared to the X-T4, you save a lot of weight. Now let's just get out for a little vlogging test. When it comes to vlogging, the X-S10 is a really nice camera because the flip out screen, because of the position of the microphone connector, it doesn't get in the way, because of the weight, because of the size. There's a lot of great things about this camera when it comes to vlogging. And as of now, you're seeing me talking, and I'm only using the stabilization on the camera together with the digital image stabilization with a non-stabilized lens, the 12mm Samyang, just because I want you to understand how good the stabilization is. And as of now, this part of the video is not stabilized in post. Later I'll show you the same part of the video stabilized versus non-stabilized in post, just for you to know what you can get with a little bit of work afterwards. And all of this goodness from a vlogging standpoint is only counterbalanced by, in my opinion, just one flaw only, and this is the use of the old battery. Because unfortunately, as you all know, this battery is not doesn't last very long. So when you are vlogging, like now I'm vlogging in the cold, you see by the wool hat and all of that, the battery drains pretty fast, and if you forget to turn the camera off every time you're done, you will see the battery going down pretty easily. So that means that in a full vlogging day, what you're going to see is that you're going to be using at least 2 batteries, but more likely you're going to go through 3 batteries. Now, is that a huge issue? I would say no, because the other option for vlogging would be the X-T4, but in that case the whole camera itself weighs quite a lot more than the X-S10. So the weight of the batteries is balanced by what you save in the weight of the camera itself. The only thing is that it's annoying that you have to swap them continuously throughout the day. Even if with the X-S10 they made finally the good decision to move the tripod mount far away from the battery door, so swapping them is not a huge hassle like it would be on the XE4 for example. So again, it's always a give and take with everything. And one other thing, this is a little bit less important maybe for some of you, but the fact that you don't have 60 frames per second in 4K, if your shooting style, if your shooting workflow is in 4K, you don't have a way to slow down the footage unless you are using the 1080p version and then upscale to 4K. In that case, you can use the good 1080 120 FPS that the camera gives you, and then you can upscale it to 4K. It's a compromise. Again, it would have been perfect with the 4K and the 60 frames per second, but maybe the next version, the XS20, is gonna be like that. Is the X-S10 a mini X-T4 like many say? Would it make more sense to get the X-S10 over the X-T4 for your everyday shooting? As always, the answer is it depends. In general, the X-S10 for the majority of the photo video enthusiasts can be a better buy over the X-T4, which saves you a lot of money that you can spend in good lenses rather than just on the camera. Because if you don't know what H.265 is, if your computer is not a beast and cannot handle the H.265 video flow, if you don't shoot 4K in slow motion, If you don't need the double SD card slot that you have on the X-T4, if you don't care too much about the weather sealing, and even if you don't care too much about the buffer emptying speed, well, the X-S10 is definitely a better buy over the X-T4. For its price, for its weight, for its dimensions, it's a great camera with only one flaw, which I already mentioned, which is the use of the old battery. Other than that, it's a great camera for both stills and video. On the other hand, if you're a pro that uses this camera every single day in every possible condition, the X-T4 gives you an edge over the X-S10. You have a peace of mind because of all the things that I already mentioned, mainly the weather sealing and the double SD card slot, which for many is really important. Not to mention the bigger viewfinder and a lot of other stuff. The longer life of the battery and other stuff. So as I said, it depends. I personally decided not to give up on my X-T4 and move to the X-S10 because I moved shooting to 4K H.265 the majority of my videos, and in general, the only fact that I already moved to 4K, if I wanna have some kind of a slow motion with the X-S10, I would need to use the 1080p and then upscale it. Probably the majority of people wouldn't notice it, but I would, and since I already bought the X-T4, I'm not gonna give up on that. But in general, for the average photographer, videographer, the X-S10 is going to be perfectly fine 99.9% of the time. The X-S10 is probably one of the best cameras that Fujifilm came out with lately, because it's with a small additional price over the X-T30 and the X-E4, gives you such a better package with the flippy screen, the stabilization, the ergonomics, and a lot of other stuff that are well worth the little premium that you pay over those cameras. In my opinion, if you're not shopping for an X-T4 and you're looking for a small, compact Fujifilm camera, there's no better choice than this. I also thought that I would have suffered the departure from the usual Fujifilm dial setup, but I must say that I adjusted to it really quickly. So even if you're using Fujifilm like me since 2012 when the X Pro 1 came out, you can adjust to the new layout pretty quickly. And if you're coming from DSLR from other brands, that's a no-brainer. You're gonna feel right at home and you're gonna enjoy the good of the Fuji with the controls of cameras that you're used to. Again, this camera is a really great camera, and I would recommend it to anybody who's not looking for specs such as those that the X-T4 has over the X-S10. That's it for today. Thank you again for watching this, I guess, pretty long video, and I apologize for that. Please subscribe to my channel. Let me know in the comments below what do you think about the camera, what do you think about the video. If you have questions, I'll try to answer to all of those. And leave me a thumbs up, of course. I need the channel to grow, and the only way you can help me with that is by subscribing, leave me a thumbs up, and by sharing the video to those who may be interested in buying an X-S10, because again, this is a great camera, and this video may give them the information that they need to decide whether to buy it or not. Again, that's it. Ciao, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.